make like some sense of what's in your head, because oftentimes that's not as sorted as you think. So clarifying your own thoughts, it's the first step always.
Did you say not as sordid?
Sorted, yeah.
Sorted. I thought you said sordid. Like
sorted. Interesting word.
Well, because do you know what it means?
Do you know
what the word sordid means, mate? I will. And listeners, be prepared for this because I'm just going to Google it. Because sordid means, are you ready for this? Involving immoral or dishonorable actions and motives, arousing moral distaste and contempt, dirty or squalid. So when you said that, it might be as sordid as you think. I was like, well, it might be not as dirty or squalid as you think. I'm like, if people are thinking now, they can just kind of empty their minds and all their strange little predilections out in their meetings. So what does the user do next? I don't know, but have you ever thought about doing this thing with a badger?
Welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard, and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve mutual excellence.
Welcome, everybody. How many meetings have you had today? Or if it's the weekend, hopefully the answer is none. But think back to the weekday. Like, how many shit, pointless, painful meetings did you endure? And it's a ratio to that. How many of these meetings ended up in more meetings to discuss the actions from the meeting? Their meetings are like mogwais or gremlins. Gremlins, they just multiply. In the right conditions, give them the right ingredients, the right food, they all just multiply. And they are like vampires sucking the life out of all of us. And today, I'm joined by Christoph Steinlehner. And we're going to drive a wooden stake through the heart of these life-sucking vampire meetings. Christoph, welcome to the podcast.
Ben, thanks for this nice intro. I really enjoyed it. So thanks for having me here in the show. And let's talk a little about this wooden stick killing stupid meetings and transforming them into valuable meetings.
Yeah, vampire meetings, because they're sucking the life out of all of us. Regular listeners will be wondering, well, Ben seems very relaxed. Perhaps he's had a drink or two. It's just been the end of a very long day, and I'm not in the mood for my normal approach to introducing the podcast episode. What I am in the mood for, though, is a conversation and to figure out how we can get rid of some of these crappy meetings. But before we really divulge all the answers to the questions, Christoph, as I think is what we're going to be going into, no pressure, I think what would be brilliant is if you could give a short introduction to yourself and tell the listeners why you're in a good place to share this information with us.
Yeah, let's head into it. So I'm in the morning here in Washington, D.C. in the US. So I have the day before me and didn't have a drink yet, just had a coffee. And I'm currently working as a product coach and consultant. So I help product managers and leaders to get out of their insanity of their daily work. But I didn't start my career in this way. So I started out as a lot of people with a long and winding road until I've been here. So I started as a web designer. I doubled down on design, did interaction design, product design, and suddenly moved into product management and leadership roles, being there as in interim positions. So I saw a lot of different companies, saw a lot of different setups. And one common theme there was like, we hopped from meeting to meeting and it was a drain. So I discovered a few things how to get out of this. And I'm happy to talk about this more.
Yes. Yes, I want to know. I'm not without the odd tool in my toolbox to help make meetings better. We had somebody on a number of months ago, a gentleman named Evan Unger, who shared lots of tips, shared a lovely metaphor for how a meeting should be like a flight or an aeroplane. And if you don't put attention into how you take off and land and think it's just about the journey once you're up, then you're missing a trick. So if after this episode, you're keen for more tips, please do check out the episode of Evan. However, shameless promotion to one side. What is your number one tip for ending the pain of these awful, endless carousel of meetings?
So my number one approach is start to map. So start to get visual. I saw a lot of tries with like, let's do agendas, let's do talking points and things like that. That sometimes works a bit, but it's hard to do. So what I discovered was that, so I was in a situation years ago where I had the funny job of leading 10 teams without any authority, as many do. So there was the client was an educational publisher changing their business models. So that meant they had to touch a lot of places. And in the beginning, I was like in this meeting hell. So it jumped from conversation to conversation. It was like, I thought it's easy, the whole change. So they wanted to change to bundles and they wanted to change to a subscription model. So not that crazy, I thought. But when I talked to a couple of people, it was always like, oh yeah, we have to talk more. And I don't know exactly about this. So talk to this person. So it just went from easy to complex. It was pretty unclear what's the next step. I got really lost from like all the information. And at the same time, since I have a background in design, I started to map these out. So I had a customer journey mapped out, and I mapped out like what technical systems need to be there, what teams are involved where, and also what we could what possibly needs to be changed to introduce these new capabilities for our customers. But I didn't know that I should share this, or I wasn't like in a mode where I'm like, oh, I share these maps because I wrote like, okay, that's my notes. I'm a designer, I'm understanding them, but it doesn't make sense to share them. And suddenly I shared them. So suddenly I was in a situation where I just like put this map out with like, oh, can you explain me here a little bit? And it completely changed how people interacted with me, because suddenly they saw like the bigger picture and they could correct my notes. So they could correct what they were seeing, and we could talk about a thing instead of talking about each other. So that was a really huge change.
So people were able to see what you were thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And they could call out what I got wrong, which was totally unclear before, because of course, if you're talking, you're in some form of convincing presentation mode. So I just had the thought, let me tell you about it, Ben, is a completely different game that look at the thing I drew. Is it like how you understand?
That's really important. It reminds me of a conversation I was having yesterday. And this is how can I put it? Message to all those people out there who think that they are terrible at drawing. I hate to break it to you, you probably are terrible at drawing. I think I'm terrible at drawing. Yesterday, I confirmed I was terrible at drawing. But by drawing terribly, we created some clarity. And it also helped me build a relationship with the person I was working with, because then they were able to make fun of me and I was able just to go with it. So not only were they able to see what I was thinking and trying to explain very badly, it also created a lovely rapport between us, because my car looked nothing like a car. It was more like a spaceship, apparently. And I mean, a spaceship, a very bad spaceship at that. It was not good, but it helped to really connect us and to help that person see what I was thinking. I want to track back, though, to something that you were saying, which is you said that you thought it was easy and it turned out it was complex. How can people tell if a situation they're in warrants some form of mapping, some form of visualization? How can we tell?
So usually it's as soon as you get in situations where there are a lot of different views on the same thing. So if it's like obvious what's the next thing to do, it's obvious everybody's talking about the same, then you don't need the extra effort. So I'm not proposing, okay, start to visualize everything just to visualize it. For me, it's a tool, get to a same page. And another thing which is pretty obvious when you start to need another method is if people going down rabbit holes. I think we all notice meetings where you're sitting there and suddenly an engineer is talking about database schemes and how we exactly solve this. And then it's like, okay, but is this the right time for this conversation? We are talking about the bigger customer journey. We're talking about what like the big steps are, but you see people always jump into some deeper conversations, which might not be at this time relevant. And then I'm starting to, okay, let's get an overview, because that can anchor also your conversation, because you can start to point at things, can also bring a group back. If somebody's starting to go deeper into this, be like, okay, that's interesting. Let's just write it down, make a note about it, and then get back into, okay, but what's happening from this step to that step?
And way to see that perhaps the thing we're dealing with is complex is when we go down non-relevant or tangential rabbit holes.
Yeah, and when it's not clear, maybe so. Just to clarify, I'm now using loosely the word complex, not in the Cynefin sin.
Oh no, fair. Like Cynefin can just whatever. Let's just do. Let's not get bogged down.
Exactly.
In Cynefin, right?
Exactly.
Let's just use
I
the
want
word.
to do because I'm thinking your listeners might be familiar with Cynefin.
Like,
from the agile space.
Do you know what? If they want to come on and talk about Cynefin, then they can find a different podcast.
Yeah,
because I love Dave Snowden. I think he's wonderful, but Cynefin just I feel is too academic for a lot of people.
Exactly. Sometimes it's really helpful. Sometimes I really like it, and sometimes it's just going to the wrong direction for a group of people. Okay, but back to our conversation.
Yeah. Complexity.
So complexity, yeah. It's like too many things to hold in your head. That's another thing. So we are really bad at holding something in our head and at the same time reason about it. So I have like a certain system, a certain journey in my head, but reasoning at the same time about this is really hard. So it's easy to put it on a wall and just look at it and be, does this make sense? And another thing is like in my head, I'm easy to betray myself. I'm easy to jump over black spots. So I just like my mind, and I think that's human, is just filling in blanks with like, yeah, there is something. But it's hard to determine if you're clear. So I think everybody knows this. They want to write an email and they're like, okay, I just have to write it down. And then it's like, exactly what, how should I, like this moment. And I think exactly the same when I map with people, that they're like, yeah, it's totally clear. Let me like step one to two, and what's happening exactly there? Then you have to get concrete. You have to have like a perspective on it. And a perspective then you could discuss and you can dissect with a group of people.
So let's try and create some clarity between ourselves and the listeners.
Yeah.
I was going to ask a question around like, oh, okay, so how do we create some of that focus from the beginning? I thought, no, Ben, that's a secondary question. The big question I think is in people's minds is when you say map, what is it that you mean?
I'm pretty agnostic to methods. So I use a lot of methods in my work, like customer journey mapping, service blueprints, Wardley mapping, impact maps, things like that. But you can also, often you start with like just a couple of post-its on a whiteboard, on a virtual whiteboard. And that's also like how I approach this, that I first like map for myself, or when I'm coaching, ask my coachee to map for themselves. Map down your thoughts and get it into like first a rough sequence, and then you can go either the method way, or you can just like put arrows between stuff. Just make like some sense of what's in your head, because oftentimes that's not as sorted as you think. So clarifying your own thoughts, it's the first step always.
Did you say not as sordid?
Sorted, yeah.
Sorted. I thought you said sordid. Like
sorted. Interesting word.
Well, because do you know what it means?
I'm
do you know
not
what the
sure.
word sordid means, mate? I will. And listeners, be prepared for this, because I'm just going to Google it. Because sordid means, are you ready for this? Involving immoral or dishonorable actions and motives. Arousing moral distaste and contempt, dirty or squalid. So when you said that, it might be as sordid as you think. I was like, what about me? Not as dirty or squalid as you think? I'm like, if people are thinking now, they can just kind of empty their minds and all their strange little predilections out in a meeting. Like, so what does the user do next? I don't know, but have you ever thought about doing this thing with a badger? Like, that's too much. Dirty. I don't want to know what you're doing with badgers. Let's focus on the user journey. Let's just focus on that. No, but I really want to talk about that thing with the badgers. No, it's too sordid. Sorted. Makes much more sense. Be a very different podcast.
Sorry for being not the native speaker.
No, it's
That's
fine.
like
Your English is about a million times better than any other language I speak, including English.
Living in the US helps.
Yeah, they're sorted. Yes, and so what you're saying is, when we map, you're not trying to push some acronym on people. You're not trying to sell some approach. You're saying it's really important and incredibly beneficial to visualize what it is we're thinking in whatever mechanism, whatever frame, whatever notation that we like. Yeah. How can we empty our minds so that other people can see them, but in a visual way, so we can help sort it rather than sharing some of the more sordid little fantasies that we have.
Exactly. And that's the direct leeway then, because if you have this artifact, you can run around with it and be like, okay, look at this. I think it's wrong. So that's pretty key. With like, not I'm selling you, because that's another like mode we just trained ourselves in meetings, that we are going there with PowerPoints, with stories and things like that, and trying to sell our idea. But at 90% of our interactions, we want to collaborate. We don't want to have like convince everybody that this is the right thing. There are places and spaces for that, of course, but most of the time I work with my team. I want to get feedback from my leadership. I want to have a collaboration. So I want to go into a situation where I'm like, that's like what I know currently and how I understand the world, but please help me. Please help me to improve this picture, and please help me to make decisions. And that leads to a completely different conversation, because suddenly, so either we are talking about it, or we are even better, like continuing the mapping. We could also do this like then in a silent mode first, as we know from many workshops. So everybody writes down a few key points, and then we discuss them. Having an artifact and changing the artifact really gets you out of this mode that you're like confronting everybody, that you're like, oh, you said this, but it's wrong. or I said that and I have to protect it because it's my thoughts. I put it out there and we can discuss about the thing instead discussing each other.
There's so many things that have come into my head as you were talking about that, because I think it's really important. I mean, the thing I do really want to share is you mentioned impact mapping, and before we started recording, we were talking about the excellent human being that is Gojko Adjic, I think is how you pronounce it. He tried to teach me that the other week, but I think it's Adjic. And his episode will be out by now, talking about lizard optimization. But before lizard optimization and before impact mapping, he created something called specification by example, which not many people are that familiar with, but it was phenomenally useful. And it was one of the main reasons why approaches such as behavior-driven development and people using Cucumber and Gherkin for automated testing, why that became so practically valuable was because of what Gojko's taught in specification by example. But he always said that in specification by example, what we want to do is we want to, well, maybe I'm not sure he says it in the book, but when he taught me spec by example, he said this to us. We want to give people something to complain about. We want to give them something visual. We want to give them something like some output, something they can see, which they can complain about. Because if you can't get feedback from someone ordinarily, give them something to complain about. And I think it's really interesting what you're saying about, having a representation of your mind and walking around with it saying like, tell me what's wrong, that this isn't right, but give me some feedback on it. Complain about it. Tell me what's good. Tell me what's bad. But let's kind of work through that, because when we look at systems thinking, one of the key tenets of systems thinking, as articulated by a gentleman called Peter Senge, was the idea of inquiry and reflection. And in order to understand the system in which we are working better, we need to be humble enough to really inquire into what people are thinking and visualize that, and then have them and us reflect upon what we're now seeing. And I think what you're saying, it really makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, exactly. So you said it so well. This like externalizing it and then being able having a critical mind of it is really important, because with that you can then also point out what are the risky pieces, what are your assumptions, what are the things you're not sure about. Because there are always the things where everybody is like quite convinced that it should work like that, or it is like that. Also, if you're mapping, oftentimes you're starting mapping like the as is. But sometimes we just don't know exactly how it works. So we had a system which is like 2 years old or 5 years old, and the engineer is like, I think it should work like that, but we have to check it out and we have to like then research a little bit. And that's exactly this point when you have your map, when you have like arrived at a shared understanding and you started to point out like what are assumptions in there, what risks are in there, things like that, then it's pretty easy to come to action points. Before, if you just talk, you will get endless into rabbit hole discussions. It's totally unclear, you have to repeat yourself over and over again. If you're going from meeting to meeting, you're starting always at like, what did we talk last time about? Oh, this and that happened. Let's talk about. And we all know this. We all know. We all be in the situations. It's like last week. Yeah, we arrived. We have to do now. And here you saved your conversation more or less. It's like if you're mapping, you can time box it, and after an hour you'll be like, okay, now we have to leave to our next meeting. But you open the next time and everybody's like, yeah, that's what our current state is.
Talking about carrying on the mapping as an artifact. So no need for minutes, perhaps. No need to have documents shared. Yeah. If you can continue to work upon the same map, it's a very solid visual reminder of what you did before.
Exactly.
And I suppose then from a coaching perspective as well, that's very useful, because one of the questions I often get asked when I'm teaching coaching is, how do I remember what the coachee said last time? And I said, well, actually, it probably isn't really your responsibility to remember what they said or agreed to last time. Like, if they can't remember that, then that isn't really on you. That's on them. But I understand where the people are coming from. So I always say to them, well, why don't you ask them what they've done based upon what they committed to do last time? What progress have they made? But actually, if you're asking people to create a model, some visualization during that coaching conversation, and you have that lovely token to then carry on, it's just a nice visual reminder for both sides of the party. If I then think to the setting up of a meeting, and you begin it, well, even before you begin, I suppose, and those first couple of minutes when I think it's really important to make sure that you've got that clarity and you know what you're there to achieve, so you can have that focus, so you know when you are on or off track. Do you have any tips, tools, techniques for how to create that necessary alignment at the beginning of a meeting, or maybe even before a meeting?
Yeah. So especially if you and your surrounding especially are not used to work visually, I say like start before the meeting. Get your own perspective and model down, because with that you have something concrete to discuss. You can go into a conversation and can be like, okay, let's look at this. This is like how I'm ascending. And you can also call out questions there, things where you're really unclear, and then get the feedback. Be like, okay, I think this is a little bit like unclear for me. I'm not sure how this has worked. I maybe made also possible versions of this, how I think it could work, and then ask for that instead of going into the conversation and trying to explain everything. Go into a conversation and show something, ask questions about it, and you really get easily into working mode instead of a meta discussion mode.
But would that be a list, like a bullet point list, or are you thinking diagrams? Like how would you do it, Christoph?
I really would like, I'm coming in there with like, for example, a customer journey map, a really simple one with 10 steps, and mark probably where there are questions I have in memory. And the nice thing is that because it's visual, because they see everything, people will also automatically point out what you're not addressing, what you're completely unaware of. And they're like, yeah, it's like this, everything is okay. But up front here, you have to kid me. It's like completely wrong. You're completely off the charts here. And these are things which wouldn't be like even possible because people don't know what's in your head. You can't look into other people's head.
Well, you can, but it's a bit sordid.
You don't see like what you want to see.
No, it's rather surprising. I remember the first time I did that. It wasn't what I was expecting at all. Don't worry, listeners, I haven't been looking inside people's heads. It was a dad joke.
Yeah. And so we are talking now a lot about visuals. And I know it's a little bit hard to talk about visuals. It's a little bit abstract.
I think it takes on average about 1,000 words to describe a picture. I heard it as a guideline.
There's like this handbook how to describe a picture, right?
Yeah, exactly. 1,000 words. Always 1,000 words.
So everybody who want to learn more there can reach out to me. I have a small guide for the mapper method. So what we are talking about now, I call the mapper method. So you listeners can also get like a visual example.
Okay.
That it's not that abstract anymore.
Is this free?
That's free, Ben.
It's free.
Yeah. You just have to write me, Ben. On LinkedIn is the easiest way. Also email is fine.
Well, maybe people should just like take a moment, look in the show notes. You'll find Christoph's LinkedIn address. You click on that in case you haven't used a link before. You click on it and then you'll get to LinkedIn. And from there, you can connect with him and ask him a question. If you're too scared, then contact me and I'll introduce you. That's fine too. But no, please do.
Working perfectly out. I'm not biting that much, so
not that much.
Okay.
It's getting sorted again. Let's move on. Let's move on. There was a story that I experienced because it was part of my life when I was a very, very young. I wasn't very young. I was younger than I am now because it was in the past. And I was in the first proper software delivery team that I'd ever worked in. And I was playing the role of a business analyst. Well, those were the skills I brought to the party. But we were supposedly using Scrum, but we weren't using Scrum. It's kind of smoke and mirrors. However, It was a great team. I met some awesome people on that team. And I was working really hard with the team and with the stakeholders to pull together some process flows. I was a big fan, and I still am secretly, well, not so secretly, a big fan of UML. I forget the notation and the real kind of dogmatic approach to it, but it was always about we model to have a conversation. And there was lots of great techniques to help you articulate certain things. And I loved UML for that. So I was a big fan of putting together activity diagrams, that kind of thing. And we had a piece of software go live, which then went wrong at like 3-4 in the morning. And because I was effectively like second line support, I would get the calls in the morning. And that's always the best way to make sure the software gets better, when you make the people who built it responsible for then maintaining it. And so I went into the office after a couple of days of like these calls, and I sat down with a guy called Matt Gornall. If you're listening, Matt, hope you're well. And I was trying to explain to him like what was supposed to happen. And he was like, I don't understand. I said, well, look at this. And I showed him my activity diagram, and he was like, oh, that's perfect. Can I just have that? And at that point, I was like, wow. In all my training to be a business analyst, in all the years I'd worked across JP Morgan and Royal Bank of Scotland, and all the mentors I had, no one had ever said to me, why don't you consider giving that map that you've created to the people who are going to support it, because it might be useful. And it changed my opinion of so much in that moment. I stopped getting the calls at 4 a.m. They were able to do their job better. I was able to do more things, but just the power of being able to share, effectively, a diagram, a visualization of lots of conversation, lots of inquiry, lots of reflection, and which was a picture of how the system was working. Just sharing that picture saved me. It let me sleep longer.
Yeah. For me, it's so fascinating because I see many teams who start to visualize, and it's like so natural if you start it. Like a lot of great teams I encountered where I learned this stuff, where like they had whiteboarding sessions. They just like put stuff out there, and everybody was on the same page. And that's also what I did a lot when I was in active product management roles. So when engineers try to like explain some complexity to me, some system, I was oftentimes like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm understanding this encryption thingy. So I drew it out and was like, do I get this correctly? Can you tell me what I'm missing here in my process flow or something like that? And it really helps to just have a conversation where both people can look at the thing and be like, yes, we are both sure that this model, how we drew it down, is how it should work. And imagine getting explained encryption 20 times over and over again, and you're like, yeah, I think I understand it. And then you're going out and coming back 2 days after and saying something, and the engineer is like, what? No, man.
Yeah. Not encryption, but I've definitely been in those situations. So it's all been very positive and lovely. And I'm not looking to talk about negative stuff per se, but what I am interested is what makes it go wrong? Like, what are the pitfalls that people should be watching out for if they're listening to this and thinking, this sounds banging, I really want to embrace this, I'm going to contact Christoph and get some information on the Mapper method, I want to go for this, but I'm scared I'm going to get it wrong. What are the pitfalls that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, so one pitfall is to stay into presentation mode. So map that out and then bring it to your team and be like, okay, that's the thing. So it's a tool to bring also a little bit of psychological safety, but you have to bring it with that. You can't enter in there with like the perfect picture and be like, oh yeah, please now say something to that. So you be humble. That's also why I really dislike this customer journey maps and things like that, which are like in perfect design, hanging, printed out on a wall, and be like somebody points at it. That's our customer journey map. please read it and understand it. It's like, okay, maybe it's a little bit helpful to understand how it's working, but nobody will even come to the idea to look at this deeper and start to critique it because it's finished. It's polished. If I see something finished and polished, I'm expecting automatically that somebody really thought through this, that it's really perfect picture, and I won't come to like even the idea I'm starting now to critique it, because probably I'm hurting feelings, probably I don't understand enough. So one thing is like, don't over polish it, stay scrappy, stay open, stay in a mode where it's obvious that it's not done, where it's obvious that it should be challenged. Another thing is like, it's not for every situation. If you want to convince your C-level, don't come with a scrappy map and be like, okay, guys, let's talk like for the next hour about what we can do there. You can extract portions for that. You can prepare like to have your story straight for an important presentation with mapping, but probably you don't use this artifact in there. If you want to go into convincing mode, if you need to sell something, obviously it's not the right tool, but you can prepare for the situation with these tools.
So what I'm taking away from that was that 1, bring the psychological safety. 2, be humble.
Yeah.
When you're saying about framing it, it was interesting. So I was making some notes. So I said, don't frame it. I mean, like, frame it. Because when people frame it, then people think that it's done. And so you're saying don't ever polish it, keep it scrappy, keep it open. And also that it's not for every occasion. But there are some situations where actually taking a mapping style approach maybe isn't the right thing to do. So with all that in mind, what's been the biggest mistake that you've made when it comes to mapping?
Biggest mistake. So on one thing was being quite arrogant that just I understand the stuff because I learned it and I'm a designer and I'm like so good with it. And I read all about these techniques and stuff like that. And so I was too arrogant with it. I walked around and was like, oh, yeah, that's my stuff and don't look at it. I think that was like a huge mistake because I totally dismissed the power of the collaboration aspect there. Just thinking about another mistake, like a situation where this was, I think like to the last point I said before, I was in a situation where I was really new. I started to map things out and I was invited to a C-level meeting. And I was jumping in there and was like, yeah, look at this stuff. And here's everything here. And I'm working here. And then everybody was like, okay, what's your point? So being in the right mode, being in the right really position with your tools is quite important. So it's not a one size fits all. Of course.
Thinking of tools, and I'm going through some little quick things in succession here because I know we haven't got a lot of time left. What technical tools? Technical tools, is that the right term to use? Interactive digital products do you use for mapping?
Yeah, so I use like the crazy high tech called Sticky on a wall sometimes, but of course now being with a lot of clients remote. I personally use Miro, but Mural, Figma, FigJam. I think Apple also has now Freeform. Things like that are totally fine. There are some which are probably a little bit like advanced, like Miro, Mural, FigJam. Others are more basic, but start with whatever you have. I also mapped in PowerPoint. So,
yeah, I mean, I love Miro. But I don't use any of its features, really. I always keep it really, really simple. I find that just for post-it notes and arrows and collecting some thoughts, it can be rather excellent. I do like some of the lovely templates that people have designed. There was one I've been using recently called a Midnight Sailboat Retrospective. And I have to admit, it's very beautifully designed. And I got to embellish it with my own sordid little fantasies around sharks which was quite a lot of fun. So if anyone's interested, the Sailmate retrospective, I can't remember the lady who did it, but did a fantastic job. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in the last 40 minutes. I can't quite believe actually how quickly it's gone. If I was going to try and surmise it, it'd be really hard because, do you know what? I mean, there's so much that has been covered. And I think that for me, the idea that we are here to create shared understanding through having people look at the same thing, to expose our own thoughts, to be open and humble and have them challenged, to not think that something we're going to produce is ever done, that we are here to evolve things and to make things better, to create that shared understanding, to create that alignment. I think are fantastic takeaways from all of this. If there is one thing through everything that we've spoken about, which you think, do you know what, people, if you're going to take one thing away, there's one message from this whole conversation, what, in your opinion, is that one thing people should be taking away?
Start mapping. It's so simple. It's just start for yourself. You don't have to make a big thing out of it. You don't have to think, oh, how do I bring this to my team and things like that. Just start, do it for yourself, get your clarity for yourself, and then sharing it and things like that will come naturally, usually. Just start putting things out there, moving a little bit of stickies around and stare at it. That's also live with it, stare at it. That helps also to reflect. That's what I do sometimes in my coaching. So just let people map out and get started. Just do it. It's so simple. You don't need to buy a tool. You don't need to learn a technique. Just a couple of stickies, a few arrows between. What are your user steps taking currently? Pretty straightforward.
Love it. And it's like with anything, which is a skill, it takes practice.
Exactly.
And we can fill some knowledge gaps. We can motivate people. And unless we practice and unless we get support on that practicing journey, we're never going to get better at it. So what I say, if you listen to this and you're going to give it a go, share a map with us, share something on LinkedIn, share something to us individually.
Yes.
Ask for feedback from the community, your friends, your peers, whoever it may be. Because unless we start doing something different, nothing's going to change. Christoph, thank you so much for coming onto the show and putting up with me in my reasonably funny mood today. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Ben. It was amazing to be here. Really had fun, and I learned a new word.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. Thank you so much for coming on, and everyone, thank you very much for listening. Please do go to iTunes. That's my request of the week. Go to iTunes, leave us a review. People have been doing that, and as a consequence, it means that we get more listeners. It's funny how these things work, but if you like us, tell the world. Have a great day. And until this time next week, being Thursday, this has been the Productivity Podcast. Thank you for listening.